I want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming to our first Zoom meeting. Um, Many people have asked me, what is March to the Polls? How do we get the name? And the answer is very simple. March to the Polls is you. Uh, we would not be able to do a thing without you. So just know you are March to the Polls. I thank you all for attending tonight. It's our first Zoom meeting, and hopefully we'll have many more, and maybe a few now and then in person where we can kind of celebrate together and get together in person. Um, in March of the Polls, I always call it MTTP, is in transition. We started in 2000 and actually 15, just a couple people, and we've grown to over 20 some odd hundred members or people who volunteer and work with us, some very often, some once a year, some once every 2 years, but every little bit from everybody helps. We've grown. We now have a 5 year plan in which we plan on growing throughout the state. I'll talk to you a little bit more about what that 5 year plan is later. But we also have specific plans where we're planning ahead for the next 12 months of all our activities in a multiplicity of areas. March of the Polls is made up of people from all over the city, comprising many different organizations. Uh, but without going much further, what I really would like to do in our transition to carry us into the future, we have hired an executive director, Camila Bordeaux. She's in my upper left-hand corner on the screen where she is on your screen. I'm not quite, yeah, wave at him, Camila. Camila is young, bright, and has every attribute to carry this organization further. She is not a Native American. She was born in Chile. She immigrated as a young person to this country with her family. By the way, her father is a bigwig at St. Mark's here in Dallas. I'm sure some of you probably have met him before. Uh, she went to the University of Texas, graduated, and then went back east to Hunter College in New York, where she got her master's in education. She became a teacher. Then she migrated because social justice has always been important to her into the nonprofit field where she headed Dallas Kids First. And we were just fortunate enough to hire her away from them to lead us into the future. Without that, I'm going to introduce you. Camila, take over the meeting.
Thank you so much, Richard. I really appreciate it. And thank you, Patrick, for using the chat to make suggestions as we go. Please feel free to do that. Use the chat if you have a question or a comment or a suggestion. Richard, that was a great intro. You remember more things about me than I can remember about my own journey and my own history. So I appreciate all that detail. And I really, truly would not be here if it weren't for Richard. And I'm sure that you can relate to this. He's inspired me to always show up, to always say yes is the way I describe it, to do everything that I can. And I've had the opportunity to volunteer with March to the Polls like many of you have over the years. And now I feel very lucky that he's entrusted me with, taking what I might call his baby. I mean, he has grown this organization tremendously, and we'll get into some of that tonight. But I do want to thank him. And so with that, let's jump into where we're spending our time today. We definitely have a lot of information we want to share with you, but at the same time, we don't want to talk at you the whole time. We want to, give you an opportunity to talk to one another and get to know the other people that are in the room. Because if we were in person, we probably would be mingling at some point or at many points throughout our evening together. And so just as an overview of the agenda, we're kind of doing the welcome right now, and we're going to continue that into the next few minutes. Then we'll kind of go into an introduction. Some of you, this might be the first event that you've ever attended for March to the Polls. Others of you, you've been with us since day one. So we'll kind of do an overview and an introduction of the March to the Polls team as well. Then we'll jump into the priorities and all those funny acronyms that you're seeing. We'll explain what those stand for. We'll have some time for discussion after we share our priorities, and then we'll get into closing and make sure that we can address as many questions that you may have as possible. So that being said, the very first thing that we want to do is just welcome you. We're going to use a feature of Zoom, which is our breakout room. Some of you may have done that in other Zoom meetings before. And we're just going to break you up into groups, give you about 8 minutes to introduce yourselves, to tell people, why you're here tonight. Tell them your name. What part of North Texas do you live in? Some of you are tuning in from across the country, but we're assuming you're somewhere from North Texas. And then most importantly, March to the Polls, we're going to get into everything that we're about, but the primary things are voting, right? Access to voting. And for you, what is important about that topic for you? So in your group, again, I'm going to put you into groups. You're going to have 8 minutes, and I'll be giving you announcements throughout so you can see it in your chat. It'll pop up on your screen, but you'll have 8 minutes, and it'll be to introduce yourself, where are you located, and then what makes you care about voting and access to voting. So with that said, I will stop my screen share, and I'm about to break you all up into groups. Welcome back, everybody. I think we have everybody back, and I'm happy to see that we have 4 pages of Zoom attendees, at least on my computer view. So really excited to see you all again. Let's see who's here with us before we jump into the content. If you can give us a wave or in the chat, let us know. Are you representing Dallas County? Is that where your home base is? Woohoo! You got a lot of Dallas. Okay.
Yeah, let's give a wave to everybody.
What about, are you representing Tarrant County? Who's representing Tarrant? Oh yeah, I love my Tarrant people. I see the clapping, enthusiastic Tarrant. Okay, and I hope this is a good way to phrase it, but we don't have as many volunteers in Collin or Denton. Raise your hand or wave to us if you're Collin or Denton. Anybody? Yay, Sandy, yeah. Shelby, awesome. We love y'all for being here. We need you. And then raise your hand or wave if you're just our non-North Central Texas person that's just super excited about March to the Polls. You live somewhere outside of that space, but you love the work. All right, so everybody's from this region. Great, unless I missed your hand. And then I have one more question. How about give us a wave if you are new to March to the Polls, if this is the first time you're joining a meeting. Erica, Shelby, that's exciting. Julian, and I can't read the name, but Julian and somebody that Julian's with. Norma, so good to see y'all. That's exciting. Mr. Williams or Mrs. Williams, M. Williams. Awesome. Okay, well, let me jump back into our presentation. We especially are excited to see our new people because that's how we do this work. Our returning volunteers will get you all trained up, I'm sure. So let's jump into the next part of our agenda. I'm going to do this relatively quickly just to make sure that we can get to more exciting parts of our time together. If you don't know, now you know. Oh, and if you could mute yourself whenever I'm chatting, just to make sure that we don't have any other noise interfering with the presentation, please do that. Thank you, already much better. So the mission of March to the Polls is to increase voter participation in historically underrepresented communities and to ensure that candidates and elected officials are advocating for and promoting justice, equity, and equal opportunity. That is a big, big mission, and we take it very seriously. And because you're with us tonight, we assume and think that you probably do too. And some interesting numbers that I want to point out to you that are, for us, signs of big progress, definitely not achieving our mission, but making a big headway. We have, because of you, as Richard said earlier today, we have registered an estimated 40,000 voters. And that is amazing. I mean, that's not just a number on a page, y'all. Somebody from this call was probably at an event or in a high school, or taking some action to get this number of people registered through our work. That is awesome. 18,000 of the 40 are registered students. And we do have a student on the call that I'm going to introduce in a little bit. That is also not a number to be shy about. That is a huge accomplishment. And then our volunteers, this all started with Richard, and then it grew to a smaller number of people. And over time, here we are. We have 2,500 volunteers, and with those of you who are new and with us for the first time tonight, we're excited to grow that number so we can have an even bigger impact on voter turnout. And then, of course, very important, our coalition partners. We have over 40 organizations that we've partnered with over time, and especially during the pandemic, it was a great opportunity for us to, lean on other organizations that share in the belief of our mission. So we want to do an introduction right now, and I'm going to pass this off to Richard to start us off. We just want you to know who the people in the room are. So I'm going to escape my screen share so that you can see everybody's faces. But Richard's going to start off with our board of directors, and then I'm going to pass it off to Athena and myself to introduce a few other key leaders in the organization. That being said, Richard, you can take it away. And I don't see Richard, so I hope he didn't go away.
He's on mute.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Richard,
Unmute,
you're
Rich.
muted. You're muted, Richard.
I'm going to introduce you just briefly, but I really would like you to introduce yourself, and I'll just call you out. If you'd say a few words about yourself, 30 seconds or less, greatly appreciate it. I'm going to start with Eric Cedillo, one of the founding members of March to the Polls with me. Eric, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Hey guys, I am from Dallas, born and raised. Love Dallas. I love my Cowboys. You can see from the footballs behind me. I'm an attorney here in Dallas, also a clinical professor of law at SMU. I'm the national legal advisor to LULAC, the League of United Latin American Citizens. On the board here with March to the Polls, and it is incredibly an honor for me to be on this board working with some wonderful people that are just incredibly like-minded in terms of all of our efforts to kind of combine, come together, and ensure that that everyone has equal access to registration and voting. So thank you all so much for being here. Rich?
Robert Elkin is also one of our original founders. Robert?
Hi, everybody. Really great to see all your faces. I am a retired business litigator. I've been working with March to the Polls for many years. I do a whole lot of different things for March to the Polls, and we'll talk about some of those things in a little while. But it is, just like Eric said, it's very gratifying to see so many people who are so committed to the idea of voting and access to voting, and that we're all pulling together in this direction to make that a reality. Thanks very much.
Another member I'd like to introduce who came on board with us is one of the go-getter. Athena, you.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I'm a retired technology executive, and I retired in 2007 and got really excited about making sure everyone had an opportunity to vote, and specifically young people. And in 2019, I heard about this wonderful organization in Dallas, Texas, that was registering so many young people and even providing buses for them to go to the polls, and started attending meetings in Dallas, and got connected with Richard and others. And I've just been so excited to watch the organization grow. I'm responsible for Tarrant County, and work with so many just amazing volunteers in Tarrant County. So that's my story.
Thank you. The next lady I'm going to introduce started coming to some of our meetings, SVEC and LVEC, and had so many great ideas. She's now a member of our board. Kaylin, introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me, Richard. So I'm Kaylin. You may hear either crying in the background because I'm a new mom, or a dog barking because I'm a new dog owner as well. So COVID happened to me in my home. And I am a former educator and a nonprofit director for Raise Your Hand Texas. We focus on education work here in Dallas County. As Richard said, I'm very familiar with SVAC. That's how I really got aligned with March to the Polls, because I love the ideal of students being civically engaged. The former educator in me really thrives from that. So I'm happy to be here. If you guys need anything, please let me know, and glad I can support.
Thank you. Next gentleman is one of Dallas's most prominent attorneys. Have to stay on his good side because you're one of the major law firms in Dallas. Great ideas, great addition to our board. Art, introduce yourself.
Thank you, Richard. I'm honored to be here, and I'm honored to be a part of the March to the Polls board. As Richard said, I'm Art Anthony. I live in Southwest Dallas County in Grand Prairie. I practice law in Dallas in commercial litigation, much like Robert and Eric. I've been in the voter engagement space for almost 20 years, working every election cycle with a variety of legal groups, primarily the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in Washington, D.C. March to the Polls does something, however, very unique and very different in that it engages and focuses on engaging people on the front end to ensure that people understand the very important aspect of voting and to encourage people, particularly young people, to register to vote at a very pivotal time in our state's history and our nation's history. And I was telling a couple of our colleagues in the breakout group that what we're doing is in a continuum of a long history of people over 150 years who have tried to expand the electorate, ensure that our process is really representative of the people, be that at the state level or at the national level. So what each and every one of you have committed to do, first and foremost by coming here, is very, very important. And it is historical. What you're doing may seem relatively insignificant, but it has great historical importance. So I personally appreciate seeing everyone here, and I'm honored to be a part of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Art. And last but not least is our last board member, who is also our executive director, Camila.
Oh, hello. Well, I'll just use this opportunity to transition because I was going to introduce our amazing leaders that have really carried this work forward. And that's what we're calling our regional leaders, since this is our North Central Texas region. So I'll start off in Tarrant. Athena, we just want to give a shout out to the people that have done the work in Tarrant. Would you mind introducing members of your team right now? And unmute yourself, Athena.
Got it. First of all, we have an amazing group of volunteers in Tarrant County. I see many names that I recognize and have worked with: Nancy Novak, Daniel Jones, a number of people I see here on the screen. But we have 10 people that have taken leadership roles in different areas of what we do. And let me just introduce the ones that are here. Unfortunately, we had many people that had conflicts and were not able to be here tonight. Becky Upchurch, are you in the meeting?
I think I
Wasn't
saw
sure.
her name. Becky, are you there? Tell us about Becky's role, Athena.
Yeah, well, Becky is one of our leaders in Arlington, where we are starting to call on the schools there and hope to be into the schools, registering students to vote, and maybe even working with our SVAC program this fall. Bob, I saw Bob Pruitt.
Yes.
You want to introduce yourself? And
Okay. Hi, I'm Bob Pruitt. I'm semi-retired, but I still have a company that does print catalogs, desktop publishing, web marketing, that kind of stuff, that kind of thing. My passion is public art. I like interactive, experiential public art. And Christy, who is not here right now, the love of my life, and I got involved with Tarrant County in January of 2020, just in time for COVID. And then we've been fortunate to work with Athena, who has poured her heart out into this this whole thing. And it's unfortunate Becky's not here we're both in Arlington. Becky is part of Arlington as well, and she has done quite a bit of work as well. I wish y'all could meet her. And I wish you could meet Christy, but she's not here.
Well, Bob, why don't you introduce Christy? Talk a minute about Christy, because she and Bob work together on a lot of things.
So Christy is semi-retired as well, and we both are involved in the community in ways other than MTTP. Christy's background is in recruiting for many years, both in working for agencies and working on the corporate side. So that's what she has, and she's a darn good recruiter. And but now we have the opportunity to do more things that we want than things that we have to, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Jess Lugo, are you on the call?
I'm here. Hi. My name is Jess Lugo. I am a teacher at Trinity High School in Euless, Texas. I met Athena on a 2018 senatorial campaign. Probably rings a bell for some of you, but even then, Athena was very excited about the idea of getting young people involved in the electoral process. And her passion really stuck with me. So when she got in touch with me to work with March to the Polls and have an opportunity to get young people really excited about getting registered to vote, but then also getting involved in the, being civically engaged was really exciting to me. And I've been excited to be a part of March to the Polls for the last year and a half or so, almost 2 years now, I think. So that's me.
I would like to interject. Jess created our virtual presentation to all the high school students, and she really deserves a round of applause. It was absolutely sensational, and due to her, we registered several thousand students virtually. Thank you, Jess.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Let's see, and then I think I'm going to just go through the other leaders. I don't think any of them are on the call because they let me know ahead of time if they have conflicts. But one of our key leaders is Lon Burnham. Many of you know him. He was a state representative for many years, but he has just been key in us building the organization in Tarrant County. And he also helps with fundraising and helps with many things across the board in March to the Polls. Claudia Camp and David Gunn, we were very fortunate to have them join the Tarrant County March to the Polls organization very early in 2019. They are retired professors from TCU, and Claudia has taken a leadership role in actually providing the presentations in Fort Worth ISD, and David has helped with our scheduling of volunteers there, and he's been a very key person in that role. Carol Peters is not with us tonight, but she handles our Facebook and social media posting. She's great. I just hand her something anytime anything important happens, and like magic, it's up on our Facebook page, and it's being distributed across the Metroplex. Susan Wade is a retired principal that worked with us, or that's been with us since early 2019, and Paulette White was her assistant. They have been working in outreach to Fort Worth ISD to call on principals and introduce March to the Polls and actually get us into the schools to provide presentations and register students to vote. So I really appreciate working with this wonderful team in Tarrant County and the wonderful March to the Polls team across the board. Just it's just been amazing over the last 2 or 3 years.
Thank you so much, Athena, and everybody for all their contributions. Let me jump to the people that are top of mind for me here that I see for our Dallas leadership team and beyond, I should say. But Sheila, can you introduce yourself and what you've been doing with March to the Polls? Oh, and you're muted, Sheila. Sorry, I muted everybody. So you have to unmute yourself when I call on you. Sorry about that.
Hi, I'm Sheila Stieglitz, and I've been with March to the Polls from really the beginning. My job was initially to be the liaison between March to the Polls and the principals and DISD. And Jane, I hope she's still on, we now split DISD, and we've gotten Carrollton Farmers Branch, Richardson, and Garland school districts. And we're working on the private schools, the charter schools, and outreach in general, just whatever we can do.
Another go-getter. Thank you so much, Sheila. Jane, are
My
you with us? Sounds
Yes,
like-
I am.
Awesome.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Sheila. So good to see so many familiar faces. Yeah, Sheila and I work together. We're kind of the junkyard dogs of this organization in a way. We're just going after these principals and all these teachers in these schools, trying to get them, they're very busy. They've got a million things to do. And we just try to stay on them and get them all scheduled.
And y'all do a great job. Let me skip to Adrian. Adrian, I'm so pumped, is our, I think, only student representative right now and an amazing leader for March to the Polls. Adrian, would you mind introducing yourself? Any background, like your school and what you've been doing with March to the Polls?
Hey, thanks, Camila. So once again, I'm Adrian Sanchez. I'm going to be a senior this year at the Barack Obama Male Leadership Academy in South Dallas. And really how I got involved with March to the Polls was actually with Camila. So Camila was with Dallas Kids First. I entered that, and eventually she hooked on to March to the Polls, and she was like, hey, do you want to come over here? And then so that's really where I got involved. And then from there, I got involved with SVEC, the Student Voter Empowerment Coalition. And from then on, it just really took off. And then so now that our other SVEC members have gone off to higher education, college and whatnot, I'm now the citywide student leader for SVEC. And so we really just work with March to the Polls in like joint collaborations, things like that, whether it's through an event or some type of meeting. And yeah, that's me. That's what we do.
Awesome. Adrian, thank you so much for making the time to join us today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Adrian. We really appreciate you. And yeah, okay, let me pass it off. I know Desiree's not with us today. I'll introduce Desiree Rios. She had a family emergency, unfortunately, but she's been a rock star leading programming for our Latino Voter Empowerment Coalition, which we'll talk about a little bit more later, and then has been an amazing advisor to our student leaders, including Adrian, just being 120% available for any support that our student leaders need. And she's also a teacher. And as we all agreed in the chat, it sounds like we love our teacher leaders. So don't get upset with me if I'm missing any other Dallas leaders. Is there anybody else that's on the call that's one of our Dallas leaders?
Yeah, I like all the work that Sheila and Jane do in getting all these schools there and all the speakers and registrars, etc. There's a little lady sitting there, Virginia, Virginia, tell them what you do and your team does. You're muted.
Not anymore. Norma Tomlinson and I did the registering this summer. I think we both did well over 500 students. I can't remember how many I did, where we would check the website every day and print off and fill out and double check addresses, get in touch with kids who didn't fill it out correctly, and then mail them the application, and they signed it and mailed it in. It was, I guess when we first started doing this, I was doing like 100 a day. It was kind of overwhelming, but then Norma came on board and it was much easier to keep up with. But we got a lot of kids registered, a lot of kids registered.
When we couldn't get in the classroom, we changed our website to where they could fill it out on our website. And Virginia and her team made sure that these kids got registered. Back to you, Camila. Thank you, Virginia.
Yeah, thank you, Virginia. Okay, I hope we got everybody, and I want to make sure that I was taking notes to make sure that I'm sticking with some of the items that the suggestions that you're sharing with me. But let's get back into now the priorities, the work, what are we here to do, and how are we going to accomplish this? And so I'm going to relay the baton now to Eric Savillo. I'm going to escape the screen share, but Eric is really just going to ground us in why are we here? Why is this important? Why is this time in particular important? So I'm going to stop my screen share, and Eric, you have the mic.
Okay, guys, I think all of us know where we are. You probably wouldn't be on this call if you didn't kind of come to the realization of what's happening in our country over the last few years. As Art had mentioned earlier, I think really appropriately, this of course goes back, voter suppression has always been an issue, a topic that had to have been dealt with. But I'm going to start with the Voting Rights Act of '65. Some of you were, of course, very aware of it when it was going on. Y'all were around at the time. This predates me. The Voting Rights Act of '65 predates me. But for some of y'all, it's a part of your history, a big part of our American history in terms of making sure that people were empowered, making sure that people specifically of color were given the opportunity to vote, getting rid of poll taxes, all of the things that were kind of grounded in voter suppressive, blatant voter suppressive efforts. Well, back in, of course, 2013 in Shelby County v. Holder, the United States Supreme Court, in a ruling that was 5-4, kind of did away with a lot of what the Voting Rights Act was all about, specifically preclearance. Preclearance, of course, was the ability of our federal government to kind of oversee what had historically been some real problems with voter suppression among certain southern states. Texas, of course, being one of them. In 2013, they maintained that Section 4B was problematic and unconstitutional because of what it based its information on. So they got rid of that, and because of that, Section 5, which required federal preclearance, was done away with. Here in the state of Texas, immediately within days of that holding, we see the first talk of requiring voter identification at the polls. For many of us, voter identification has become commonplace. For many of us over the last few years, we just kind of expect it. And when we see the political back and forth, okay, well, there's a concession with respect to voter identification. For some of you folks who are not from Texas, and I think one of our conversations earlier was kind of along those lines. Voter ID, voter suppression, what is that all about? Here in the state of Texas, we have a long history. Back, of course, when this all went down, voter identification requirements, it was challenged. Several federal judges said that it was unconstitutional, that it was suppressive of minorities. And there were reports that it would suppress about 200,000 young people of color. And of course, it went forward. It was kind of watered down to a certain extent, and that has become commonplace in our current voter world. We've seen a lot more things happening over the last cycle. We, of course, heard a lot about what happened when our prior president lost, and some of the efforts that came to the fore, what people call the big lie in terms of we have fraud everywhere, fraud. We need voter integrity legislation to protect us from this fraud that is happening. When just about every Secretary of State, just about every person in the know said there is no widespread fraud, there are no problems. But here we are with legislation that kind of supports that. We're fighting, of course, here in the state of Texas. A number of our Democrats in the House, of course, fled to Washington. And again, this is March to the Polls is a very, nonpartisan effort. It truly is. But when we're talking about voter suppression, all parties should be engaged. But we kind of know where this is coming from. And it really affects our young people and our young people of color. 18 states have currently enacted about 30 laws that restrict access to the polls. There's been about 400 bills that were voter suppressive in a number of states across the country. Texas, of course, being one of the biggest and one of the most problematic in terms of what it is they're doing. So we know that there is a real need for us to take action as March to the Polls, to register students, to empower young people, and to get them out to the polls, just across the board. But the young people are the real, specifically for me, in terms of the way I see the world and what we need done, needs to happen as young people of color. This is why we have, as an offset to March to the Polls, our SVET group, our Student Voter Empowerment Coalition, which we're going to talk about, and our Latino Voter Empowerment Coalition that we'll talk a little bit more about later. Here in the state of Texas, a few years ago, our public schools became primarily Latino. 53% of our public schools here in the state of Texas are now Latino. 37 years ago, the state of Texas had a law enacted that required principals to, of course, become the deputy registrars, the ones who were engaged in having those young people, those seniors, register to vote. It's something that they didn't take as seriously. The Secretary of State didn't really push it. About 7 years ago, LULAC and the League of Women Voters started going into specifically DISD to start registering voters because the principals really weren't doing it. About 4 or 5 years ago, March to the Polls took that job over and expanded it tremendously. And we'll talk about that in a few, but now we're in much more than just DISD, and it's a really, really critical point that we need to kind of get across. Here in the United States, 75,000 young Latinos turn 18, US citizens turn 18 every single month, 75,000. It's an incredible number, but it's one that we need to ensure that we are addressing by getting them registered and then getting them voting. With March to the Polls, we not only register the students, we talk to them, we empower them. Many of them are Latinos, many of them are of course, children of color. 92% of DISD are children of color. So it's a situation where this is what we're looking at when we go into the schools and talk to them, engage them. We've talked repeatedly over the years, a number of groups that I'm with, that Latinos are the big sleeping giant, that once they start voting, we're going to start rolling and things are going to change. Perhaps Texas will turn blue. And if Texas turns blue, then we'll have the presidency from here on out, again, in a truly nonpartisan way, or as nonpartisan as I can be. But that hasn't happened for a number of reasons. I think the biggest being that we don't have a culture, a Latino culture of voting. Many of our folks are first or second generation. You don't have that history in the African-American community. They've been dealing with this for years and years. You have your parents who voted and impressed upon you the need to vote. You had your grandparents doing the same. We don't have that same type of culture in the Latino community. And it's up to us to change that with some of the things that we do with March to the Polls. As you can see, the attacks that we've seen regarding voter suppression have come with respect to primarily voter registration. It makes it more difficult. And who are voter registrars? They're the ones who are usually voting for the first time. They're young people. Many of us have been voting for years and years. The only change we usually need to make is if we move, and we don't really do that often. And it's really easy for us to kind of take care of that. So where do the attacks come? They come in the terms of who's registered to vote, the obstacles that come with it, the 24-hour voting that was incredible down in Houston, very workable. A number of people took advantage of it. People of color took advantage of it. The drive-through voting, number of people of color were taking advantage of it. So what does the voter suppression hit? It hits those areas. It's strategic. It's no longer blatant with what we were dealing with in the 60s. It's strategic. And unfortunately, a number of our judges have kind of bought into that ideology. So what we do is march to the polls. We all wear different hats. Many of us, I'm with LULAC. We take on litigation on these voter suppressive efforts. We file lawsuits. We become plaintiffs. But March to the Polls does something different. We've got to be flexible enough to engage folks, get them registered and get them voting, and deal with the laws that unfortunately are passed. Those Democrats are going to try to stay away from Texas for as long as possible, but ultimately what's probably going to happen is they're going to have a quorum and those bills are going to become law signed by Governor Abbott. So we need to deal with that. We as an organization need to realize how we shift, how we pivot. We did it with voter identification requirements. We got a number of people pitching in to help find voter identification monies to help support young people in acquiring those things. So those are the pivot points we need to make, and they're very necessary because of what we're dealing with in this day and age. So I just wanted to mention that to you guys, understand the importance and the impact of what's happening today. I know y'all all know about it, y'all see it, y'all live it, and this is why you're here. But now it's time to engage. Now it's time to shift focus and make sure things happen. And this is the way to do it. So thank you so much for being here this evening. And hopefully you'll get a little bit more information. If you're not really aware of what March the Polls does, you'll get more information regarding that. And please feel free to ask questions later. Camila?
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. I was looking forward to everything that Eric would say because he always has magic coming out of his mouth. So I appreciate your time. And we're going to get into that detail of what the work is and where you can all plug in. And I'll begin just by briefly introducing that we have what we call 3 big buckets of work. And then we have a 4th new bucket is what I'm going to call it, one that we're developing still. Time allowing, I think Robert can also add in a few words for that 4th new bucket that we've kind of introduced. That being said, before I jump into that detail, Richard, if you would take just like a minute to tell us about the expansion plan and our growth plan so that people have context.
Right, March to the Polls is unique. We do something that no other organization does, and the plan works based on the number of people we've registered, but more important, getting people actually to the polls. As Eric mentioned, there isn't, we deal primarily in minority students, people of color. We deal in the public schools. We're going to, which are all minority in the state of Texas. We have a 5-year expansion plan in which we're going to divide the state up into 7 districts. The DFW Metroplex is 1 district. Houston area is another. Austin, San Antonio is a 3rd. El Paso, West Texas, the 4th. The Panhandle is 1. The Rio Grande Valley, East Texas, South Texas, another. And we're going to implement and have our leadership in the 3 areas you saw before, which is the voter empowerment and student voter engagement and Latino voter empowerment. Each one of those will have their own leaders and be doing it. We're not going to do it in 1 year. It'll take us 5 years to expand throughout the state, but we'll perfect everything here in District 1, which is the Metroplex, the DFW area. And I'll go in and turn it back to Camila, who will talk about the specific projects that each of our groups will be doing and where you could come in and really make a difference and help not only yourselves, but your friends and anybody else you can get in to help us. Thank you, Camila.
Thanks, Richard. All right, so I'll jump into each one. I'm about to go into a slide that has the different opportunities for these 3 big buckets. So let me just jump into the voter engagement programs, what we've given the acronym of VEP. So when we talk about our voter engagement programs, it's a lot. I mean, the gray boxes on the left are telling you the big parts of that work, which is registration, education, voter access, and mobilizing people to go to the polls, to march to the polls. And so when we talk about registration, you are probably familiar with this because it's one of our, what I'm going to call a star item. our high school registration efforts. Many of you have volunteered in that area already. Aside from registering in the high schools, though, we have our 4-county VDR deputization event where, we get as many people across our community deputized so they can register other voters at different events that are maybe not related at all to March to the Polls. And then March to the Polls has kind of gotten a reputation for having volunteers. I mean, look at the amount of you that showed up tonight. People call on March to the Polls to say, hey, we have a back to school event. Do you think you could send us a VDR? Do you think you could have a registration or a voter education table at our event? So that's the registration. For education, a lot of that is happening in our classrooms. We gave a shout out to Jess Lugo earlier, who transitioned and all of our presentations into a virtual setting, which we were doing in person, and honestly helped us just kind of align and make sure that every speaker, no matter what classroom or what high school they're in, that we're giving the same tools so that they're equipped to go to the polls. And then neighborhood canvassing, that's another way that we educate people, is just by going and literally showing up where they live, knocking on their door and sharing information about an upcoming election or an event that's happening in their neighborhood so they can attend and learn some more and join us. When we talk about accessibility, this is really exciting. And I'm even more excited that we have a volunteer. I don't know if he's here tonight, but that has said they can help us with this and continue to support. March to the Polls has a registration opportunity on its website. So if you visit our website, our students had to use it this past year, you can apply to register. And then Virginia's team and a few volunteers have printed those applications to send to the students to get them signed. So that's one way that we've made voting more accessible, is by making registration accessible. We also have what we call voter application containers that have information about elections, and they have registration applications in them. And those containers, the Tarrant leadership team has done a great job of placing those in different areas. Our Dallas team has done the same, just in businesses, in churches, in apartments, anywhere where people are frequenting, they're visiting as a part of their routine, where we can introduce voting as an important part of their day-to-day. And then last but not least, the most important, I would say, and maybe the toughest thing, mobilizing people. Okay, you're registered, now what? We have to work to mobilize them. And so this is where, again, our neighborhood canvassing efforts, when we go out and knock doors and say, hey, come on out, there's an election, or hey, come on out, we're going to invite you to a candidate forum. And then any events, we've had lots of really cool events. Again, a shout out to Richard for some of the events that he's organized, and definitely the LVEC program as well, just to get people excited about actually going to the polls. So for this, and I'm speaking fast, I hope in the chat you can let me know if it's too fast. I just want to make sure we have time to review everything, but the bottom part has our volunteer needs. So I'm going to send out an email after we hang up for today, but for now, I'll just list out the things. And in the email, I'll list out everything in detail again, but we need lots of volunteers for our high school registration efforts for all sorts of roles. We definitely need volunteers, and many of you have already signed up to help us with our 4-county VDR event, the deputization event. We need people that can be registration event managers. Whenever we get that phone call from the opera that says, hey, we have an opera, we want to have a registration table at our event, and we can have somebody that can reach out to the volunteers to make sure we get someone there. Website support, as I said, to support the online registration application. Placing boxes in buildings in nearby areas, building relationships with local contacts. And as I mentioned, canvassers to support voter mobilization. I will send an email with all of this listed. We're probably going to send out this presentation and definitely going to send out a recording of this soon, so you can come back and look at it. But we have lots of volunteer needs in our voter engagement programs. When we look at LVEC, Latino Voter Empowerment Coalition, and again, a big shout out to Eric for being a leader in this. And yes, I think I just answered the question in the chat that I will definitely send out the presentation. Here, it's truly every tool that March to the Polls has, but we bring it all together into one community, what we call a neighborhood adoption. So in the past, we've looked at voter turnout, found that, again, unfortunately, our Latinos are not turning out to vote at the same level as their peer groups. And so we bring registration, education, access, mobilization, the student program that I'll talk about later. all of these things to a neighborhood where we can build a relationship, build trust, and encourage our people to get out and vote. So in terms of volunteer needs here, you definitely do not have to be Hispanic or identify as a Latino, Latina. This is just if you're excited about helping support higher turnout for this group that is underrepresented. And so if you want to help with event planning, with, again, placing boxes in these communities, canvassing to get people to go out and vote, all of that for LVEC. And again, I'll send out an email with all of this listed. And this is our specialty program. We love SVEC. Adrian is one of our key leaders. We have another, I think, student leader in Tarrant. These are, I'm just going to read this because this is, SVEC is so important to us. I don't want to miss a detail. SVEC was formed as a strategy for engaging our high school students in civic engagement and in truly changing the culture of voting over the long term. So the idea of sustaining presence in schools beyond the high school registration visits, which is only, many of you are familiar, right? You show up for maybe 40 minutes or an hour and then that's it. And you don't see the students again. This is to continue that work. And SVEC has now formed student-led clubs in schools, and it's open to all students from grades 9 through 12. Right now, we've had mostly seniors and juniors join these clubs, but they are open to all grades. And the clubs operate both at a school club level as well as a district-wide level. And some of the events that are listed here are amazing and things that our students have already done and that we want to continue to do. So they've had student-led candidate forums, town halls, community outreach events. They've registered students at their schools. They've had conversations with elected officials. And then with COVID, when it's more behind us and we feel safe again, we definitely want to encourage field trips with our student leaders to all these various meetings of the Commissioners Court, City Council, School Board. Austin and DC are our big goals that we want to get to with our students. So lots of work. And so volunteer needs here would be to support our school sponsors. We have teachers, including somebody like a Jess Lugo, who is doing a lot, both in her classroom for her students that she's teaching, but also, you know, beyond her classroom. And so we want to support our school sponsors if we can, by helping them with event planning or, you know, showing up to be a chaperone on a trip. If you feel passionate about a particular high school, you can adopt a school and help make sure that we have a club at that school. So those are some of the needs for SVEC. And again, for the third time, I will send an email with all of this written out so you can look at it and decide what's for you and where you might sign up to volunteer.
One thing, Camila, and time's short, so I'll make it very short. We've just concluded an arrangement with DISD where they're going to be supporting us and putting clubs in every one of their high schools. So we have a lot of work to do to get the sponsors, to get the organization. And so when we say adopt a school, if you have a school in your neighborhood, help us there. Or if you graduated from a school, help us there. There's so much that we could do, and we will change the culture of voting among young people through SVEC. Go ahead.
Oh, good. The fourth category, and Robert, I'm going to give you the floor if you want to add in anything. The fourth category, as I said, is new, an area that we're expanding into, and what we've paraphrased it to say it's voting freedom, you know, the freedom to vote and protection. And essentially, March to the Polls has always worked with other organizations, but for this category of work, it's to support just the freedom to vote. And if there are organizations that are advocating for specific challenges that we're facing as a region or as a state or even as a country, March to the Polls is a partner in this. And so in terms of volunteer needs, what I have listed is you can just be an advocate for us, you know, stay on alert. If we send out an email asking for you to maybe send a note to an elected official, to be on the lookout for that so that we can amplify the needs of our voters and future voters. Robert, do you want to add anything to this slide?
Yeah, let me add just a couple of things. So we, March to the Polls is already part of several coalitions. The Fair Maps Texas Coalition, which deals with gerrymandering, the Texas Election Protection Coalition, where we help deal with protecting voters on election day or during early voting who are having problems at the polls. The Texas Election Reform Coalition, which is our way of staying in touch with the folks who are really leading the fight down at the ledge session now against various voting bills. And we spearheaded the creation of an organization called Dallas Votes, which is an acronym for voting openly, trouble-free, equitably, and safely. We work with the election department, and we have a very good relationship with them, and they are very interested in that coalition, which is a nonpartisan, cross-sectional coalition ranging from organizations like the United Way to different bar associations to faith-based organizations like Faith Commons or Faith Forward. And so they want us to help them educate the community about voting, have communications out to voters. There's going to be a whole range of activities that we'll be able to help with in that regard that will go beyond the mere advocacy stuff that I shouldn't say mere, but the advocacy stuff that Camilo talked about. And I saw a comment in the chat about some of the provisions in some of the new laws that deal with allowing partisan poll watchers to intimidate voters. And what can we do about that? Well, that's going to be one of the things that the Election Protection Coalition will take on. It'll be one of the things that Dallas Votes will be able to work with the Dallas County Elections Department on in terms of getting volunteers to be watchers of the watchers and people who can work at polling locations. So we're hopeful that this area will allow us to complement all the work that we're doing to actually getting people to polls by continuing to make sure that they can have access and be protected at the polls.
Perfect, Robert. I appreciate you being here to add that. Very important. Okay, so now we are doing okay with time, but I want to make sure that we don't talk at you for a minute longer. And so we're going to jump into a small group discussion right now. I'm going to put you into groups again. It'll likely be a different group than the one you were in before. And we just want you to discuss with the people in your group, what activity are you excited about supporting? What, where do you want to volunteer? And then if you do have any questions, you can formulate them as a group. And when we come back, we'll answer as many of those questions as possible. And anything that we don't get to, of course, we'll have a plan so that we can answer your questions. So again, I'm going to give you some time. I'll send out an announcement via the Zoom chat. But the question is, what are you excited about supporting? Don't worry about using the exact name or terminology that we're using. Just tell us, where do you want to help? So I'm going to stop my screen share right now. I'm going to go ahead and put you into breakout rooms. And as a reminder, these will be different people than who you were with before. And we're going to send you off now. I'll start with 5 minutes, and hopefully that's enough time for you. Okay, 5 minutes. What are you excited about supporting? All right, well, I want to give us time for questions. And so briefly, I'm going to pop up the just the what I'm calling the buckets of work again, just so you can see it. So again, all of our voter engagement programs, our Latino neighborhood adoption, Latino voter empowerment efforts, our student voter empowerment efforts, and then anything that's kind of in what I'm calling our new developing bucket of protecting the freedom to vote.
You're not gonna.
And please mute yourself if you can, and I'll try to monitor it as well and mute people if I'm hearing noise. But let me take some questions. We had a great discussion in the breakout room I joined. So go ahead and just throw them at me. What questions do you have? Or what are you excited about volunteering in?
I had a question. I know that we're doing a lot of efforts about the high schools, but is there a similar effort going into being at like the community colleges?
Great question, Shelby. We don't have that concerted effort right now. We had wanted to do that for some time, but I can connect you with an organization that that has that going. I don't know if it's like across all the colleges or anything like that, but I think they do visit colleges and have that relationship. And so not here with us right now. We would love to do that too.
I can say that in Tarrant County, pre-pandemic, there was a lot of work done at the TCC campuses.
Yes.
And some were very, very active, and I participated in several of those. In terms of the other college campuses, I don't know, but TCC was, if there was someone at a particular campus that was really committed to this, it got done. And so that's what I know about Tarrant County.
Shelby, in Dallas County, the League of Women Voters does a lot. If you want to call Barbara Larkin with the League of Women Voters, Barbara Larkin, she can help you on that. And we send them volunteers to help them also.
Richard?
So you could work with them through us, or you could work with them direct.
Richard, this is Roseanne Mills. Barbara Larkin, unfortunately, has moved out of state. So I think there are other people on this call who can put into the chat.
That was Courtney who moved out of state.
Oh, it was Courtney. Oh, yeah.
Barbara's still in her place doing the League of Women Voters thing. Yeah.
Okay, well, it is great to see you,
I'll reach out to the
Kathy.
League of
Thank
Women.
you.
Hi, Roseanne.
I think Larry Simpson is on this call, or was. I believe he's also a League of Women Voters person. Once you work with some people with the League, you will be on their database and they will invite you to colleges and other events. So you can freelance. You don't have to do everything you do through March to the Polls. That they'll get in touch with you. I promise.
Art, you had your hand up. Did you want to say something?
I did, to the extent that folks might have this question in the near term as we get ready to re-engage with students, to the extent that these pandemic-related disruptions continue and possibly worsen. What might be your suggestions in terms of what people might focus on in the way of volunteering with us that'll have the greatest impact?
Okay, and let me make sure I understood. I was also looking at the chat. Are you talking about for a virtual environment?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So luckily, our schools are still a great place to volunteer virtually. A lot of things you can also do from home. I think Virginia can attest to that with even like printing out the student applications if you have printer in your home, and then visiting the classrooms on Zoom. We've trained people too. If you don't feel comfortable with Zoom, but the schools have asked us to have a virtual option for the students that won't be going to the schools in person. And to Art's point, we're also going to have to be really flexible because the last we heard, they want us in person. But I'm sure that we can anticipate changes, I guess is what I'm saying. What else? I mean, managing volunteers, even if, let's say, we're in a world where most people are going to visit the schools as an example, we need people that can share, okay, Camila, you're going to be going to Skyline at 2 p.m. on Thursday. Here's the information, or here's where you park. So there's lots of logistics that can happen from your computer and the safety of your home. And I do think the high school registration is probably one of the key places where you can have a big impact. But I'm sure there's others. And I have a few hands. I'm going to try to skip around to M. Williams. I think you're a teacher.
Hi, no, I'm not a teacher. I just had a suggestion. I don't know if this is since we are really trying to target younger people, has some place like the American Airlines Center, the Cotton Bowl, Fair Park, have places like that been contacted to set up something before concerts or after concerts, for example?
Yes, Richard has been super creative. We've partnered with the Mavs and have had drive-through events there with supplies and materials to get people registered. And we will not lose sight of that creativity to partner with, large facilities that can help us, or events that can help us get the word out and register and mobilize voters. That being said, please give us all of your ideas and suggestions. I will send an email tomorrow to make sure that you have a designated place to drop your suggestions. But I think you probably have my email or Richard's, and we'll include that in our outreach tomorrow so that if something pops up, you can send it at any point. Linda, what about you? What question do you have?
Yeah, I've been engaged with registering students in schools. I was wondering whether it's just easier to send students to the Secretary of State's website and request them to send them the form rather than you collecting the form and going through that extra process unless part of it is instructional?
Let me answer that,
yes,
Camila.
I was gonna say.
After 6 years working in the classrooms with students, what I've learned is that about 30 to 40% of them, if you left it up to them to mail it in, will not mail it, and they don't get registered. Our job is to get them registered and to educate and motivate them in the classroom as to why it is important that they exercise their God-given right to vote. And that's part of the motivation that we have to go through to let them know that they have a voice and they have power and they need to exercise their power. I think Kimberly is one of our great speakers who could probably attest to that.
Thank you, Richard. We are running low on time. And so what I'd like to do, since I don't see anybody raising hands or putting things in the chat, we're going to have a follow-up email and we want you to reach out to us and ask us your questions. But let me just jump back into our quick announcements for closing so we can get you out of here on time. And I'm taking notes as you all are speaking. So there's really 3 things. Number 1 is that we will send you an email so you can revisit any volunteer sign-up opportunities, okay? So you can, after tonight, kind of rethink, okay, I already signed up, I think I might add something else. Or I don't know, maybe what I signed up for isn't perfect for me, I'm gonna change that. Or maybe you haven't signed up yet and you'll be signing up for the first time tomorrow. That's number 1. Number 2 has a few pieces in it. We have a massive fundraising goal this year and we're really excited about it, but it's obviously also a big challenge. We need to raise to get all of these programs in action, to do the activities for the students, to print out registration applications through our website. We want to raise $500,000 for this year of programming, and we would love your support. One of the ways that you can help us that I think is great for volunteers or supporters of an org. Uh-oh, Richard, could you mute yourself, please? Thank you, Richard. Is a day called North Texas Giving Day. You might have heard of this already from other sources, but it's on September 23rd this year. And what it is it's a community-wide online giving event, and it's sponsored by and organized by the Communities Foundation of Texas. I won't go into all of the details since I'll send this out in writing to you, but there's so many fun ways to support this day. And it's really exciting to get behind an org that you feel passionate about. And this year we set a personal goal of raising $30,000 just through this day. And we've gotten, I don't know if close is the word, but we've made a big impact in the past. And so we hope that this is something you can also help us with. And the very last thing, the most important thing for this whole deck, if you will, is to thank you. We sincerely and truly want to thank you. You guys, I mean, if you're joining us for the first time, we're so appreciative. And if you've been with us since day one, you're the one that's made this happen, that, you know, we've had the impact we've had. So it's 8:30. If you have to go, please go. I'll stick around for a few minutes and answer any remaining questions, okay? But thank you all and have a great night.